Evening, members, and anyone online and officers. If anyone's got any electronic devices, please mute them so we don't get any feedback. Any remote participants, please keep your camera and microphone off unless they wish to speak, and don't use the camera at all if possible because it can affect the quality of the connection. The meeting may well be recorded, and data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained according to the Council's data retention policy, and the recording may be added to the Council's website. Any members accessing the meeting remotely should use their Swale Borough Council KCC laptop to participate. If you use the link or mobile tablet device, it's not always possible to identify you, and you may not be recorded as in remote attendance. So welcome to this evening's meeting of the Planning and Transportation Policy Working Group, including any visiting members. I'm afraid I can't see the screen because the new IT is very small indeed, but welcome if you are. And the following staff are in attendance. We have Joe as Head of Planning, Paul Casey, Enforcement Officer, and Kelly, Democratic Services. Emergency evacuation. As usual, we're not expecting an alarm, so if it goes off, we need to leave by that door there. Don't use lifts. And if that door's blocked, we get out the other way. So, are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Elliot Jays. His substitute is Councillor Chris Palmer. Councillor Mike Henderson. His substitute is Councillor Charles Gibson. Councillor Kieran Golding. His substitute is Councillor Anne Kavanagh. And Councillor Julian Speed. Thank you.
Thank you. On to the minutes of the last meeting held on the 23rd of November, minutes numbers 428 to 434. Are we happy that these are a correct record? Thank you.
Sorry.
Right, do you have any declarations of interest? Excellent. Right, so we're moving straight on to the enforcement local plan draft for consultation. And Paul Casey, could you perhaps could you introduce the item? Thank you.
Yes, good evening. Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to begin this evening by giving a brief summary of what we do in planning enforcement. The planning enforcement team deals with the carrying out of development without permission, unauthorised work to listed buildings, non-compliance with planning conditions, the display of advertisements without consent, the felling or lopping of protected trees, and also complaints under high hedge legislation. So the general approach to planning enforcement, it's a discretionary power, it's not a duty, and it should only be exercised in the public interest and where harm is caused. It should not be used against minor or technical breaches and should not be used to regularise, but not to enforce when it is clearly necessary, may be maladministration. So the objectives of enforcement are to bring to an end unacceptable development or that part of the development that is unacceptable. And it's important to differentiate between development that is unacceptable in principle, may be acceptable subject to controls, or it causes no harm and is therefore acceptable. So what do we do in planning enforcement? When we commence an investigation, we must establish whether what is complained about is actually development as defined under the Planning Act. And if it is, whether it is permitted development and whether it has planning permission, and if none of the above apply, it's a breach of planning control normally. So, if formal action is required, and we have various powers, we can issue an enforcement or listed building enforcement notice, issue a tree replanting notice, issue a breach of condition notice, issue a stop notice, temporary stop notice, and we can also prosecute in cases where there are unauthorised works to a listed building, unauthorised lopping or felling of trees with tree preservation orders attached, and also unauthorised advertisements and failure to comply with an enforcement notice. We can also seek an order of the court for an injunction. Once we issue an enforcement notice, there is a right of appeal. There are a number of grounds of appeal that people can lodge an appeal. The first one being that planning permission ought to be granted. The second one, that what is alleged has not taken place, or that it doesn't need planning permission, or it's immune from enforcement action, or that we haven't served the notice properly, that the requirements are excessive, and that we haven't given them long enough to comply. So, in conclusion, to carry out our role, we need the help of the public. We are keeping the lid on the kettle, but there is an ever-increasing number of complaints and ever-increasing expectations. And there's an increased tendency, of course, for people to resort to the council to solve neighbour disputes. But this goes on to the enforcement local plan that we're here for this evening. The Planning Acts give the council, as local planning authority, powers in relation to planning enforcement. However, government policy and guidance in the National Planning Policy Framework and National Planning Policy Guidance makes it clear that those powers are discretionary and should only be exercised when it is expedient to do so. Any action taken should be commensurate with the seriousness of the breach of planning control and the harm caused or harm that may be caused. And government guidance is also clear that where development is acceptable on its planning merits, enforcement action should not be taken simply to remedy the absence of planning permission. It advises that planning permission may be granted retrospectively to regularise development already carried out, and it should be noted that carrying out development without planning permission is not normally a criminal offence, but development undertaken without planning permission is at risk of enforcement action. So the National Planning Policy Framework indicates that local planning authorities should consider publishing a local enforcement plan to manage enforcement proactively in a way that is appropriate to their area. This should set out how they will monitor the implementation of planning permissions, investigate alleged cases of unauthorised development and take action where it is appropriate to do so. So the council has produced this enforcement local plan to update and replace the current enforcement strategy which was published in 2021. And this takes into account current best practice and to consider service provision. So it's followed the guidance provided in the National Planning Policy Guidance, which provides considerable detail under the title of Ensuring Effective Enforcement, and provides guidance on when enforcement action should be taken and outlines the various forms of action available. So the Planning Enforcement Service here at Swale comprises a planning enforcement team leader and 4 enforcement officers that sit within the planning section. This is not only in terms of investigation resources, but also in providing the planning and legal expertise in conjunction with Mid-Kent Legal that's needed to successfully pursue effective enforcement and to deal with subsequent appeals and prosecutions. So the plan is arranged into sections and explains what constitutes a breach of planning control and the types of development investigated, with a list of what we don't investigate. It then goes on to explain our powers under the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, our rights of entry without a warrant, the appeals procedure and prosecution and direct action. And the last section deals with performance priorities and standards. So it's hoped the new enforcement local plan will provide consistency in our approach, and it will go some way to managing the public's expectations of the service. I propose that members consider the draft enforcement local plan for consultation and propose any relevant amendments, and that members recommend the launch of a consultation period on the draft plan. The report will be considered by a P&R committee prior to the proposed consultation period of the 26th of February to the 21st of April 2024. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Right. Are there any questions or comments on the on this? Okay. Tony.
Thank you. Yes, I'm basically in favour of this report. I think it's a good report that has been drawn up. But I do want to bring up one thing. When I've contacted enforcement within my ward, when it's been suspected that something's taking place, I appreciate that enforcement are busy, but they don't always seem to respond quick enough. Now, there is one particular issue that now has gone for retrospective in Milton Regis within the heritage area, which really I think possibly could have been stopped before it got completed. So that is a concern of mine. But as I say, I'm based behind this report. Thank you.
Monique.
Oh, got newfangled machines. Yeah, it's along similar lines to Councillor Winkler's. In our sort of categorisation of ones and twos, I totally understand why ones are there. I think the ones I get the most complaints about is unauthorised development in conservation areas, which obviously we've taken the time and trouble to make conservation areas. So, and given the consideration of the character and possible harm to it, is there any way we could maybe move that up a level or actually have one specific to conservation areas?
Paul, could I ask you to come back on this?
Yes, thank you, Monique, for that. Yes, we will consider that. Obviously, there are certain extra restrictions in conservation areas. For example, demolition of walls and other kinds of development. But normally, permitted development rights still exist in conservation areas. Changes of uses of buildings, for example, to under prior notification from shops to flats, whether it's in the conservation area or not, doesn't actually come into it. But if you have any specific concerns about that, then please let me know and we'll see what we can do in terms of this plan. Right, I'd just like to go back to the earlier question raised about your concerns that we don't respond in a timely fashion. So each case is judged on its own merits. Obviously, being a public meeting, I can't go into the sort of ins and outs of whatever investigation's taking place there. But each case is judged on its merits in terms of the immediate harm, as to whether it's irreversible, and other public interest tests. So yeah, we do have a wide range of powers available. The most useful one that we have is a temporary stop notice, which gives the developer, well, it's served on the developer and they have 28 days where they must cease the activity, stop work, and that gives them time then to, reconsider their position, whereby they may then submit a retrospective application or submit the details pertaining to a planning condition on a planning permission. And we do use those regularly. Stop notices are normally served in conjunction with an enforcement notice, and that can take a bit of time because we need to get legal advice from our partners at Mid-Kent Legal.
Okay, thanks for coming back on that.
Thank you.
Just picking up on the conservation area point, I mean, in the policy, it says unauthorised work in a conservation area leading to permanent harm. So that would cover that side of things, but things where there isn't permanent harm, where does that fit into this sort of seriousness scale?
So what we'll do, if we come across work that's been undertaken for example, to a shop front in a conservation area, we will speak to the planning officers to get their advice as to whether an application would be, recommended for approval and what their views are. If they say, for example, it's a non-starter, it's unlikely to get permission, then we will look at serving an enforcement notice on it. Obviously, we will warn the people, first of all, this is the action we're taking. We suggest that you stop work, and then we will serve the enforcement notice.
Richard, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the actual report itself is very well done. The actual document itself is quite easy to read, quite easy understandable. The only trouble is I always find words are interesting because who decides proportionality? Who decides what's minor? Because what's minor to sometimes the planning enforcement team isn't minor to the public, particularly when it's a conservation area. So it's the interpretation. The actual report is fine. Everything in there, hunky-dory, apart from someone needs to look at the formatting because your margins are different on different pages. But that's a minor point. If that's the only criticism, it's not a bad thing, is it? But the other thing that I would criticise is we're changing how people can view planning enforcement on the portal. But I've tried searching and all I get is all the applications coming up. So I'm not sure if that's fully live yet. But also it's very hard to search for one if you know exactly the way it's used. So you've got an application or something going on which is known locally as Pond Farm, but it's put on there Landers south of London Road, you'll never find it. So I think we need to look at how we make people who can look and search for applications a lot more simple. But the report itself is fine. Sometimes the interpretation might be the problem, but that's for a future date, I think. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Just like to say that live planning enforcement investigations are not available on the public planning website. The search facility that you mentioned, I believe it's the new one that's just recently been introduced. There is a tab on the far right-hand corner that needs to be clicked. It says enforcements. Otherwise, if that's not clicked, you will get up just a list of planning applications. And also, it will only bring up sites where we've served an enforcement notice going back as far as 1990. And if you require notices from before 1990, then we'd have to do a manual search. But that's part and parcel of the council's enforcement register that we're currently working on. So that's the first step. And it acts as a register. Some other local authorities actually use that as their enforcement register. And that went live a couple of weeks ago. So,
however, just to come back on that, if that's all right, Chair, I have tried it live, and even clicking the enforcement tab on the far side, you search for something, it shows all planning applications as well. But that might be just something that needs tweaking. Thank you.
okay, I'll speak to the IT team over at Maidstone to see if there's any issues or bugs that need to be ironed out. Thank you.
If I could perhaps expand on that question about what is counted minor, can you give us a feel of what sort of things would be minor and what would be? I mean, I was thinking of one in my ward where the brickwork, it was a design feature that helped it get through planning permission in terms of detailing of the brickwork and metal guttering, and all those things were just ignored when the building came to be put in place. And I certainly remember parish councillors being upset about the fact that was a minor breach but wasn't going to be looked at. Yeah. Can you give us a bit more of a feel of what minor might mean, or what that means in your interpretation?
Yeah, certainly. We receive a large number of complaints relating to fences that are, slightly over the permitted height, extensions that have been built under permitted development rights that are slightly too high, or they extend a bit further out than what's permitted, We will have people complaining about sheds that are, you know, sort of 10 centimetres over what's permitted. And we would class those as sort of technical breaches where there's no immediate harm and it wouldn't be in the wider public interest to take enforcement action. So, yeah, they're all classed as breaches, and we do have a sort of tolerance level. For example, every council's different. Another example is if you have a fence adjacent to the highway, you can only have a fence up to 1 metre high adjacent to the highway. Now, in the planning legislation, it doesn't say how far it can be set back, etc. So it's down to, you know, local interpretation. I've always gone by the 2 metre rule. If it's set back by more than 2 metres from the highway, they can have a 2 metre high fence. But every case is different. It depends where it is. It sometimes, to a degree, depends on what kind of materials are used. You know, its visual impact in terms of a fence. So it's always on a case-by-case basis. There's no hard and fast rule of what is minor. And, of course, we need to weigh up the, you know, circumstances as well. Why has this person complained? And invariably, it's a neighbour dispute. And then they can lead to becoming, you know, vexatious complainants as well. So we have to tread a fine line a lot of the time. But where it's a clear-cut breach, for example, a caravan on agricultural land that's being lived in, that's a clear breach. That's not minor, and we will deal with that appropriately.
Councillor Gibson, Charles.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few quick ones from me. Firstly, to confirm, do we have a time frame for the leaders forward to appear? Is that going to be before consultation? Or is it just on my version of the PDF? There's a big blank space signed Councillor Gibson.
Oh, the forward.
Yeah.
Sorry, may I answer that? Yeah.
Yeah, but I can do all of them and
Sorry,
then take them in one go. I'm relaxed either way.
The forward will be added on when it goes live, and I've been working on that in conjunction with Tim, and he just needs to agree to that.
I was just checking there wasn't an error on my document and everybody else could
Sorry
see it.
about
I
that.
was missing it. That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you. And then the other question really is relating to the equalities impact. I was wondering, particularly around the Gypsy and Traveller community, I would suggest that unauthorised pitching of caravans probably does have an equalities impact on the Traveller community. And I wondered really what consultation we'd done with that community, how we'd kind of measured that and the impact that was likely to have.
Yeah, what we do, there is Gypsy and Traveller councils and other organisations that are normally on board, and they help and they act as mediators between planning enforcement and the Gypsy and Traveller community. For example, if there's an approved site where additional caravans have turned up to accommodate extra family members, children have grown up, for example, where they may be acceptable because of the size of the site and there's no impact, then we will always make sure, first of all, we'll check if there's any health and any welfare considerations. Are there children there, for example, before we consider enforcement action. We don't only, of course, consider enforcement action if what's been carried out is totally unacceptable. But if we can, regularise it through an application, then we'll invite one. And then it's, of course, down to the planners to decide. So it's not just about enforcing what's there. There's a lot of background work involved as well to find out who's on site, if they've got any health, welfare issues as well.
Thank you. Sorry. And then finally, just it was really helpful to see that there's 4 officers. I don't, maybe this is planned to be included in the forward. That might be the natural place for it. But I wondered if there was a way of including in the report the kind of scale of the challenge and what you're able to achieve and the levels of things you do. So I think it'd be really useful, even if it isn't in the report, for us to understand, actually you can manage 10 visits a day, but you receive 100 complaints a day, or whatever the scale is. I think it'd be really useful for us to understand that, and maybe for the public to understand that as well, to help set their expectations.
Yeah, good point. I'll certainly take that on board. Just like to point out that we served 14 planning enforcement notices last year, which is quite high in Kent compared to other local authorities. The fact that we've served 14 isn't good, but it just shows the kind of challenges that we have out in the district. And number of complaints last year fell to a 5-6 year low. That's because we now, when a complaint comes in, we look at it, decide whether there's a breach before it's handed over to the investigating officers. And of course, we inform the complainants as well, yeah, this is a breach, it's not a breach. So it doesn't automatically get logged as an enforcement case when it comes in. And that frees up more of the officers' time to deal with, you know, the real sort of serious nitty-gritty stuff.
Thanks, that's great.
Okay.
James.
Thanks. I've got a few things on it. Firstly, with the search, with the enforcement thing, I've tried it and I didn't get any other applications come up. It worked okay, but there is a problem with, unless you know that exact address or not the address necessarily, it's the name of that site, it doesn't seem to come up. And I think it would be better if they can do a map search like they do with the thing, because I went onto the map and obviously it doesn't then come up with enforcement cases, only the planning applications. So if they could do a map search with that, I think it would be much easier, because residents will just be able to go in, see exactly where the area is, and that would work better. Just on the document, generally, overall, I was wondering why we're calling it an enforcement local plan, because the enforcement strategy was quite clear what it was. Because we have a local plan now, well, everyone has a local plan, I think for residents, it would be a little bit confusing, even probably for us, to say it's an enforcement local plan. This is a local plan with a normal local plan. It will just get a bit confusing. I can understand that in the MPPF, government are saying enforcement, a local enforcement plan. But why are we calling it an enforcement local plan?
Thank you. Yeah, that's the terminology, the way it's been described. Obviously, yeah, that's correct. The MPPF states that council should consider a local enforcement plan. Our current one isn't actually called that, as you know, as you've stated, it is called a strategy. It's free that, because it's not a policy document per se. It's down to councils to decide what, you know, what title they give to the document. But I do take on board your point in terms of making it sort of more, let's say, sort of, you know, readable to the public, that they may well not know what that means. As for the search facility, that was done in conjunction with Maidstone Borough Council. Maidstone have an online enforcement register where you can look by ward and parish, and it will automatically show where an enforcement notice has been issued. We're working on that. We don't have the electronic version at the moment, and if anyone wants to inspect the register, there is a book that we keep of enforcement notices. So that's in the process of being transferred over to an Excel spreadsheet to go online.
James, do you want to? Another?
Sorry, could I just be rude there? What's the timing for that electronic one to come forward, the Excel sheet to be searchable online?
Yeah, so we finished the work on the search facility, which is now live. So it's a big job, and it's sort of resource heavy, because it's not just a matter of putting the actual reference number, the year the notice was served, and the address. We have to do checks, sometimes have to go out and visit to make sure, or to see if the notice has actually been complied with, because that is on one of the columns as well, date notice complied with. Because when people come to us to check, they'll normally go through local land charges who'll contact us to find out if it's been complied with. So to get rid of that and to save time, people can then see date issued, whether there's been an appeal, etc., etc. So all that has to be inputted manually. I haven't got a timescale for that, I'm afraid, at the moment, but it's hoped it will be by the end of this year.
So I was just discussing with Paul, what we could potentially do around that, making it more accessible to the public, is call it an enforcement strategy, and then just somewhere in the preamble say, this is what the NPPF refers to as an enforcement local plan. So it's clear that we're falling in line with the NPPF suggestions, but rename it.
Yeah.
I'm happy. I think that's a good suggestion. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that would be good to do that. But I think even then you still said it's enforcement local plan, but the NPPF is local enforcement plan. It's just, it does, I know it's only the way the words go around, but it does make a bit of a difference with that local plan issue. But no, that'd be good. Thanks. I think I've just got four or five other points on there. On the actual document 3.3, on page 16, it says that conversion of garages or outbuildings to residential if they're used incidentally or ancillary to the main dwelling isn't a breach.
Page
16, and it's part of, it starts on page 15 where it says other works not classed as breaches.
What paragraph, sorry, is that?
And then we've got the first, page 16 at the top, it's the third bullet point, conversion of garages or outbuildings. We get a lot of applications come in for conversion of outbuildings and garages, and it's just surprising to see that there, that we're almost putting it out there to say to people, you can go and do what you like now, because why are we getting lots of applications in if that is not a planning breach?
Right, so normally the conversion of an existing outbuilding to accommodation that's used in conjunction with the main dwelling house is not a breach of planning control. There hasn't been a material change of use under planning law. The same with garages, especially integral garages. If a householder wants to take down a garage door and put in a window and convert it into a study or a bedroom, then that doesn't require planning permission, as that is not a material change of use. It would only be a matter for us to get involved with if, for example, somebody's built a shed or summer house and it's being used by what's termed as a granny flat, for example, and they're living in it totally independently of the main house, and it's a new building, then that would need planning permission. But a conversion of an existing building has been completed, it's been in existence for a while, that can be converted into overspill, sleeping accommodation without the need for permission. It's only when you build a new building.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just,
Yeah,
while we're on that point, so an Airbnb, for example, that would be not ancillary to the main building if someone started using it for that, or is that borderline?
So if you're talking about part of a property that's been sort of separated off and it's being advertised for holiday lets, yeah? Okay, so that under planning, that is the creation of a new unit of accommodation, whether it's being let out on Airbnb or it's been lived in permanently on a short-term lease or, a sort of tenancy, that's a change of use. It's not a change of use, Airbnb, if the whole property's being, let out to people, short-term lets, that's not a change of use. I know some London boroughs have introduced their own legislation to overcome that, where they're only allowed to let them out for 90 days a year, I believe. But generally speaking, it's not a change of use, it's still a dwelling, no matter how it's being let out or the people, the occupiers in there. You may have, what's new now with Airbnbs, you'll have a large, say, 5-6 bedroom house that's used as a destination for hen parties and 18 birthday parties, that kind of thing, where they'll have trade bins outside and loud music going to all hours, throughout the night. That is normally a change of use because it's no longer seen as a residential, dwelling. It's a destination where people come that aren't related, friends, they all get together and meet up, and that causes great problems, especially, you know, residential areas where there's lots of comings and goings. And so, yeah, it's an interesting one, but Airbnbs, and we do get quite a few complaints, you know, relating to short-term letting.
Thank you. Sorry, James, do carry on.
That's all right, thanks. The next one is 3.4, still on that same page, and we mentioned there about what 3 words, which is good if we say that customers can use it, but I don't remember seeing that at all on the website, giving it an option. I don't know if that's something that's new on there, or is it something that we don't do? Because if we're putting in here that that's possible to use what 3 words, really we want probably have something on the website where that can just go straight in, and that sort of box asking for that, rather than just be impossible to do it. The next one I've got is 4.1 on the document, which is the next page. We say there that for TPOs and listed buildings that aim to visit site within 2 working days. For a TPO specifically, you can do something within an hour to a tree that's got a TPO. I'm just wondering how we do that, because 2 days you could go there and there's no tree left at all. So I understand it's probably aimed to visit within 2 working days, but I think that probably needs something looking at a bit more, because otherwise people are going to be thinking, well, that's fine, we can get away with that one.
Thank you. Yeah, no, totally agree with you there. That should actually read same day. I can assure you that if we get a report about a listed building where there's a sign that there's irreversible damage or trees that are being felled, then officers are sent out on the same day. And your query about what 3 words, I'll have a look at the current online reporting form. It's administered by Maidstone IT to see if we can have that added onto the option, you know, where the breach is taking place.
That would be good, thanks. And just got two more quick ones. Just within 4.1 as well, we mention about planning officers carrying proof identification. Just trying to find which it may be necessary for officers to bring third parties onto the land to assist, advise them. We talk about warrants and prosecution, just, I suppose, informing people what they can expect and what we would be doing. But are we using CCTV, body cams or anything? Because if we are, I think when you do go onto some sites, that may need to be mentioned in there as well. I think it would be a good place to put if we are doing that. And the final one was 5.1. We're asking people to do a 30-day log when there's a breach of change of use. I think I don't know if that's something new or if that's something we've had in the strategy before. I don't remember seeing that one. But I think to ask someone to be logging something for 30 days when there's a change of use breach going on, I think is a bit much. And you know, what exactly is that? What are we expecting people to do for 30 days? If there's something that's been used, I don't know, for instance, there's a garage that's selling cars that shouldn't be, they got to do a log every 30 days saying it's still there because you've got a change of use, nothing's going to change.
Thank you. So the reference to a 30-day log is where basically we're asking people during the course of their normal day-to-day activities to make a note of an activity that's causing them disturbance. If they've noticed something, a car turning up or, you know, loud noises and banging, that kind of thing. For example, that could be in relation to a neighbour who's running a business from their property. There are occasions where you don't need planning permission to run a business from home as long as it's essentially still a dwelling house. For example, you could be a hairdresser or a nail technician and you're having people turning up on pre-booked appointments, maybe 1 or 2 a day where there's no real harm caused. There's, of course, the potential for that to intensify if the business, improves and there's more customers, and then you may start seeing signs going up, people blocking driveways, etc., and noise and disturbance. So the reason why we ask people to keep a diary, so we can build a picture of what's going on the site to determine whether there's been an actual material change of use of, in this instance I'm describing, of a dwelling house to a mixed use of a dwelling house and commercial. So we do need to apply that test. We don't act on, one-off occurrences where someone rings up and says, my neighbour's repairing cars in the driveway. I think they're running a business. We need that to be monitored over 30 days. Now, that there are data protection issues here, whatever, but normally we say, look, we're not asking you to act as our agent. We're asking you just to keep a diary of what you're experiencing for 30 days. Don't go out of your way to take photographs. Don't put yourself at risk, etc. So that's the main reason there. Now, in regards to our visits, no, we don't have cameras at all. No, but we do use cameras to take photos on site of what we find.
I'll just come back quickly on that point with the 30-day log. I think I understand probably what you're saying there and the need, but I think the way that it's written in here, in that document, what we're saying is, if I was a resident reading this, I would look at that and think, well, the score of the alleged breach may alter new information and saying where it just says where there is a change of use, a 30-day log will need to be submitted. It doesn't say what that log needs to include. If it's said on there where there is a change of use, a 30-day log showing or stating what the noise issue or what there is would make more sense. Otherwise, because the way that reads is every change of use, you have to have a 30-day log. So, and also, at what point is that come in? Because someone could look at that and think, well, we need to do a 30-day log. I'll do that first, and then I'll go and report it. Well, they need to report it first, and this is just something that happens after that process starts. So it just needs, I think, maybe working out of what the process is and what that would need to include.
Thank you. Yes, what we would normally do in these sort of situations is we would always conduct a site visit within the 2 or 5 days, and we would conduct visits as part of our normal day-to-day duties as well, whilst that person's keeping a diary, so we can build up a picture. And then when if the complainant's kept a diary, we can then ask the perpetrator, can you explain what you're doing, etc., and then we can compare the details to see if there's truth in the matter, because there are, of course, a lot of vexatious complaints, people accusing each other of doing certain things without planning permission. So it's all about evidence and sort of, building a picture of what's really going on. And it also focuses their minds as well. What they may have considered to be a problem is not actually a problem. And you'd be surprised of the number of people that we no longer hear about once we've asked them, keep a diary. Now, obviously, if it was a problem, then I'm sure they would have got back in touch with us after we've concluded the investigation.
I think Richard was next, then Anne.
Yeah, it's in the same vein as Councillor Hunt, really, because I think he raised a good point that it's a member of the public who'd be reading this, and it says here, adjacent to the highway. And I think most members of the public would read that as the road. And you could have a wide footpath and a grass verge, and the highway goes right up to the edge of the property, or will include the path and the foot. So they may think they're building 2 metres away, when in fact they're not. And from all innocence, they've read that. And maybe just in brackets, it includes grass verges and the footpath.
Sorry, this is in relation to permitted development rights for fences.
Fences, yeah, page 16, first paragraph. It's just how the public read it.
yeah, take on board your point that highway includes the footpath as well, of course, and it also includes unadopted highways and tracks where they act as a means of access, so they don't need to be adopted by the highway authority at all. But yeah, we will look at, you know, clarifying that as well, in terms of what is a highway. Thank you.
Anne.
Thank you. It's back to page 16. I think it's just a typo. The third bullet point, I thought James might have picked it up. The 9th word is. I think it runs far better without is.
What paragraph is that, sorry?
The page 16, the third bullet point, conversion of garages or outbuildings to residential if is they are used incidentally. I don't think you need the is. Thank you.
Thank you very much for picking up on that. We'll get that changed.
I did actually see that.
Monique.
Oh dear. Appendix 2, so a nicely coloured table. When we talk about days, just for clarification, we mean days and not working days. I mean, because quite often a lot of unauthorised stuff happens at the weekends, like cutting down trees, certain other things.
Yeah, they are working days. Dare I say it, we don't work at the weekend. However, if there's an urgent matter, then of course we will make sure resources are available to deal with any issues that arise at the weekend. Previous job, there was a word of unauthorised development, and we worked throughout the weekend in order to get an injunction, ready to be heard at the court Monday morning. So we will of course act on serious breaches.
Okay, so you probably want to put working days just for everyone's education on those tables. Otherwise, there's a false expectation. But I think I've raised it elsewhere previously when we've talked about this, probably before your time here, or before us. It was about having some sort of on-call facility or emergency facility so that there is a mechanism for members of the public to highlight where there is a serious breach that does need urgent attention that's happening at the weekend. Because it's normally, to be fair, it's normally public bank holiday weekends where there's even more time to do more damage that I have had in my ward, that somehow that there's a mechanism for escalating those at the weekend, so an on-call officer can pick that up.
James.
Wouldn't our out of hours number that we've got deal with that at all? So obviously there is an officer on call. They're not necessarily enforcement, but if there was a major thing going on, and we'd have to call someone or speak to someone, would that work?
Yeah, there is an out of hours number here. I personally monitor my email inbox throughout the weekend for any situations that have arisen since, clocking off on Friday. But to make it more formal, that would be a sort of resource issue as to making that, sort of permanent, as it were, where there is an on-call enforcement officer. So that's something that we would need to look at. I'll take your point.
Any further comments? No. So we have the proposal that members consider the local enforcement plan, if we're going to change the wording of it, 24-27 for consultation, propose any relevant amendments, which you've done, and that we recommend a launch of the consultation period of the draft plan. Is someone going to propose that?
I'll propose that.
I think Anne got there first, followed by Richard.
Oh, sorry. No problem.
So are we in favour of this proposal? Yep. Okay, that's good. That's covered that one. I have one item of any other business while the meeting's running? It's just pertaining to the couple of meetings ago, we agreed the strategy that was then agreed by council about the local plan, about how the council was going to move forward on that. It was pending the guidance from the NPPF, which came out on the 19th of December, and that, as that guidance has now come out, we're therefore in the position where the council can move forward with the plan. So I thought it important to announce that is the plan, and that we'll be moving forward with that as soon as we possibly can. Was there anything you wanted to add to that, Joe?
Thank you, Chair. I think we probably would like something in the minutes to reflect that this group is noting that the national planning landscape is now considered clear, and then that precondition for developing the local development scheme is met. So are members happy that we note that?
Yes, yeah, we support that.
Wow.
Well, it's more clear than it was before.
I don't think it's totally clear, given the example they've given about adopting different housing numbers. But yeah, we've got a clear green light to go, I think is really what we're in, and I think we would like to note that. Yes. With that covered, then I think we'll close the meeting at this point, and then we'll just have a brief word once we're offline.